Hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Neil Howard, here on Health Professional Radio. Thank you so much for joining us again. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with returning guest, Dr. Gwen Nichols. Dr. Nichols is Chief Medical Officer at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. She's joining us once again to talk about the Children's Initiative. It's a $100 million effort to address the lack of treatments for pediatric blood cancers. Welcome back to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Nichols. Thanks for returning.
Thank you so much, Neil.
Well, for our listeners who may not be familiar with you, you're here with us before, give us a brief background about yourself and talk about your role there at LLS.
Well, thanks. I'm a hematologist, oncologist, and a scientist by training. I am the Chief Medical Officer at the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, where I oversee the mission, which is scientific research portfolio, our patient and professional education and support services, and our policy and advocacy.
You know, when it comes to blood cancers, many drugs have been approved by the FDA for adults with blood cancers. When you were with us before, we talked about the different types of blood cancers, who's affected, how the prevalence of some of these blood cancers. We didn't talk about children that were affected by some of these blood cancers. I understand that you're involved in an initiative, huge initiative, to address the lack of treatments for kids. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I think it might be important for your listeners to understand that the drug development process, because it's long and expensive, always looks for more patients and the larger indications. Fortunately, children's cancers are rare, but that always puts them in the back seat when it comes to creating new therapies. And for far too long, we've created therapies for adults, the more prevalent cancers. This is a business that makes sense. But children aren't little adults, and their biology is different. And so there's been a dearth of new therapies specific for the biology of children, and children are sort of an afterthought in the drug development process. And when you think about how much longer children have to live, the potential, if you cure a 6-year-old rather than a 60-year-old, it seems backwards. We have so many more years to be useful and functional people in society. We need to change that paradigm, and the way to do it is to be much more efficient at the process, because it's a costly and cumbersome process. The other piece is we have to collaborate. These are rare diseases, and so doing it one drug at a time makes no sense at all. We need to be much more coordinated and much more thoughtful in how we develop new therapies for children.
You know, you talked about perspective and rarity of these diseases. Now, just to put it into perspective, are we talking about diseases that are found in adults that happen to be affecting children? Or are we talking about rarity because some of these cancers only affect children?
Well, what's interesting is the cancers look very similar to those cancers in adults. So for years, we've thought they were the same. But in fact, as we understand biologically, they may look the same. They may arise in similar parts of the body. But the biology of the cancer, what drives a cancer in a 6-year-old is much different than what drives a cancer in a 60-year-old. And so the drugs may be similar that will be effective, but oftentimes they're not. And so on our last conversation, I mentioned that over the last 3 years, there have been more than 50 new agents approved in the blood cancer space. During that same period of time, only one has been approved for children's cancers. And in fact, for the last 40 years, there are really only a handful of agents that have been approved for children's cancers.
Now, in the outset of our conversation, I talked about LLS's initiative. Give us a quick overview of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's Children's Initiative and talk about its goal.
Well, it's multi-pronged. So the goal is to get new therapies specific to the biology of childhood cancer, and in particular for us, the blood cancers. But this is not as simple as it sounds. We need more pediatric-specific research to understand that biology. So we have started a new research program with pediatric blood cancer being the specific focus. We've also expanded our education and support services for children and their families, and we've been involved in Washington in driving policies and laws that cause barriers to care for children and for adults. But the most important part of this is a global precision medicine clinical trial. And what I mean by that is that we want to study each child's cancer biology by sequencing the tumors, by looking at it in a very precise way, and then not treating with a one-size-fits-all therapy, but actually saying, this is a trial that might work for this child, this is a trial that might work for this child because of the biology of their tumor. And what I mentioned about clinical trials, oftentimes they are focused around a drug, and then you look for kids that fit that drug. What we're doing is looking at the kids and then providing them the drug that fits them. So we will work with multiple pharmaceutical partners in the context of a master trial or a trial that has multiple arms. This is much more efficient, and it works for everyone. It works for the kids, and it works for our pharmaceutical partners because they aren't screening hundreds of children to find the one that fits their trial.
You talked about partners. Let's talk about a couple of the major players that you're collaborating with. Obviously, this is a global effort. Two major players, the National Cancer Institute and the Children's Oncology Group as well. Am I right?
Yes. So our National Cancer Institute has put together a way for pediatric cancer clinical trials in the United States and, in fact, in North America, to be much more efficient in that they have a single contract that will allow a clinical trial to open up in all the children's hospitals around the United States. That's a wonderful system, but what they don't have is the way to appropriately negotiate with pharmaceutical partners and to make that efficient. So we are coming together with the National Cancer Institute and the Children's Oncology Group, which is a group of physicians who represent all the children's hospitals in the U.S. And the experts in the blood cancers have joined with us to create what we're calling the PedAL study, which is Pediatric Acute Leukemia. And we will, the NCI's infrastructure will allow it to be centralized. The COG has a network of 9,000 experts and almost 200 hospitals. So it's a very efficient system. And we now have a group in Europe of different collaborative partners that will form together and work with us. So we're very excited that this will include the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and Europe, and all trying to coordinate so that every child can have an option if their disease comes back after their initial therapy.
What type of timeline are we talking about for this study?
Well, we talked last time about COVID slowing things down in the laboratory. It's also slowed clinical trials down. But we were hoping that this might start at the end of 2020. It looks more like it will be the middle of 2021, but I know that next year this trial will start. We have had wonderful interactions with the Food and Drug Administration. They are very supportive of doing a coordinated effort and are willing to try and work with the European Medicines Agency, which is their partner organization for Europe to make this a success. So we're very excited.
Well, we'd like to learn some more online about LLS and about children's leukemia as well. Where can we go online and get some more information? Well,
please, I hope your listeners will go to LLS.org. There is a whole page about the Children's Initiative and the PedAL clinical trial, and as well as all of the services and educational materials and research. We have a wonderful website. There's almost too much information. It's just so exciting, and I really would love to have your listeners, especially if they or someone they care for has a blood cancer, to please take advantage of all the free resources that LLS provides.
Gwen, I appreciate you joining us here on Health Professional Radio. Always a pleasure. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much, Neil. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Gwen Nichols, talking about LLS Children's Initiative and the PedAL trial. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/healthprofessionalradio.